and thank you all for making the time today. We're all very disappointed we aren't able to be there in person as we normally would for these types of communications. But I think, I think we need to seize the opportunity and look at alternative ways of getting the message out in more clear and concise methods. And I think, webinars are a really good tool. I think they're a very efficient way of engaging with growers and researchers alike in spreading key information. So it's great to see such a good cross-section of participants on today's meeting. Also, Maureen, just while we've got the opportunity, it'd be a good opportunity to introduce Casey, who's going to be doing your maternity relief. So Casey's there with Maureen. Might just pay for just a quick 2-second intro, Casey, as to your background, and I'm sure you'll be seeing many of the people on the line in person, but for those that haven't met you, just a quick hello from you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. My name's Casey. So I'm actually based in Cairns. I live here with my husband. My background is I grew up on a cattle property in central Queensland, just north of Emerald. And I have previously worked in agronomy, in broadacre crops and also pasture systems, and have a Bachelor of Rural Science through the University of New England. Looking forward to getting to know you all.
Thank you so much. And Maureen, when's your last day? When are you hanging up the boots, so to speak?
Last day will be 2nd of October. So
excellent.
Another 3 weeks and a little bit.
Terrific. All righty. Well, back to you, Maureen.
Thank you. Well, I think Casey will be chairing the meeting from here on. So I'll let Casey introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Maureen. So first up, we have Olive Hood. She is the Regional Extension Manager for Northern Australia for Hort Innovation. So she will be giving us some information about the Hort Innovation Extension team and the work that they've been doing the last 6 months in relation to COVID. So over to you, Olive. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Robert and Maureen and Casey and Sarah, for the opportunity to introduce myself to you today as the Regional Extension Manager for Hort Innovation in Northern Australia, and to be based in Townsville, but coming to you today from Bowen. And to also give you a brief overview of what Extension has been up to over the last 6 months and the objectives, and also to give you a bit of an idea of how we've responded to our consultation with you in relation to how you want Hort Innovation to invest in COVID response measures. So very quickly, the objective of the Extension program is to work with our service provider partners like Maureen and Sarah and Casey, to value add to what they're doing, identify issues that are cross-cutting, and will value add to what they're currently already doing very well. In the last 6 months, we have been building the team. We've almost got a full cohort across Australia. We've been talking with our service providers, once again, thank you, Maureen and Sarah, about their ideas, opportunities and needs. And we've been talking to your leaders about your ideas, opportunities and needs. And we've been managing our industry portfolio programs, and we've consulted with you in relation to COVID, which is what I'm just going to briefly cover in the next slide, is what we have done since then. So the Seasonal Horticultural Labour Demand and Workforce Study has prepared a list of gaps that they see for the workforce over the next 18 months, and they're working strategically with partners to proactively fill those gaps. The consumer category
sorry, Olive, I think if you could put yourself on presentation mode, I think, because we can only see the front slide at this stage.
Is that better? Okay, well,
I can share your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Maureen has these PowerPoints for you with all the contacts and the links in them as well. So
Here you go.
So in terms of the next one, so I'm on to the next slide. Yeah, sorry, that one. So in terms of the consumer, so I spoke about the labour demand and workforce study. In terms of the consumer category impact, they're monitoring consumer attitudes and changes in behaviour in response to COVID. And at that website, you will find weekly and monthly updates in relation to that. At Harvest to Home, we're monitoring the total fresh produce consumption, and we're comparing that annually to last year as another COVID impact measure from which we can make strategic decisions. The international trade and marketing team have been doing a lot of work in relation to the marketing. It's the Taste Australia program, and they're evolving that into digitalisation and increasing the international market portfolio into other markets. And in relation to trade logistics, they're looking at air freight and sea freight logistic COVID impacts and how they're going to respond to that, and also future international trade, business and market pathways. And I just wanted to flag sustainability framework as a piece of work that's been done so that we can proactively communicate the industry's commitment to sustainable, ethical and safe farming practices, and the framework is due out in March next year. So in closing, just once again, thank you very much for having along to say hello and to let you know what we're up to and how we're responding to our consultation with you in relation to COVID-19. And I look forward to working with you all over in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olive. Does anyone have any questions for Olive at this point? No, we're all good. Okay, well, let's move on. So now we're going to be hearing from the Queensland Department of Ag and Fisheries. We'll be hearing from Ian Bally, Jeff Dickinson and Dale Bennett with an R&D update. Over to you guys. Thank you. Hello. You guys, oh, there you are, Ian.
Hi, how are we going?
Thank you.
So can you see our screen?
Not yet.
Right, we're just setting this up, and the screen we want to see. Screen one. Just bear with us a second.
Yep, it's coming up.
Is that the right screen? Don't think that is, Jeff.
Oh, we can see my mango.
Yep. We're just going to make sure we've got the right screen.
At the bottom there, you've got the PowerPoint. Here we go.
Yeah.
You'll need to click on the slideshow. Yeah, at the bottom. Perfect.
So which screen are you seeing? You're seeing the main display or the one with the notes?
No, we can see your slides, so it's all good.
Yeah, all good.
Great, okay. Well, good morning everyone, and thanks for coming along. Today I'm going to speak about a couple of our programs of research in mangoes that we're running out of DAF in Mareeba. Much of the work is actually carried out on our research station at Walkerman. And the two areas that I'm going to give you a brief synopsis on what we've done and where we're going is the Mango Genetic Improvement Program and the Mango Orchard Intensification Program, otherwise known as the Small Tree Program. So we'll start off with the Mango Genetic Improvement Program. We've got two projects in this program. There's the Queensland Mango Breeding Project. This project has continued on from the old National Mango Breeding Project, which many of you may have heard about for some time. And we have the National Tree Crop Genomics Project. This is a new project that started about a year ago, run with support from the Queensland Government and Hort Innovations, Hort Frontiers Advanced Production Assistance Fund. This project is looking at the genetics of mangoes, trying to help us learn a little bit more about what makes the genetics tick, and to build and develop some tools for using that knowledge to improve mango genetics. So our mango breeding program has been running for a while now, and it ticks over away in the background, and we continue to develop new hybrids. So our main aims of this project is to develop new breeding lines that have regular bearing, high yielding. We want to improve the fruit quality, things like colour, flavour, shelf life. Another major goal of the breeding program is lower vigour trees, suitable for high density intensive orchard systems. So with the trend towards trying to get more trees into a hectare, we need varieties that are actually smaller and can be planted at higher densities. The flavour profile we're chasing is basically a Kingston Pride based flavour profile, because that's what our markets want and are asking for. We have part of our project and part of our program that is looking to develop some anthracnose tolerance, some post-harvest anthracnose tolerance, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Dwarfing rootstocks is another way where we're breeding genetics into the dwarfing or low vigor trees. And we have the genetic knowledge and genomic selection tools, which is all about improving the efficiency of breeding. Breeding is a very slow process. Okay, so where are we up to? So in our hybridization project, we've been continuing to hybridize each year between a whole range of parents, chasing those traits that I mentioned earlier on. Several of these aims are not only shared between the breeding project, but they also relate to other DAF projects and industry goals, things like the small high productive trees with low vigor is certainly a very strong goal for us in the breeding program, and that ties in very well with our intensification program, which we also know as the small tree program. So these two projects do work quite well together and in unison. So here's a picture of our key technician who does a lot of the crossing for us, Cheryl Maddox, and she goes out, she's actually out there this morning making crosses. So to date, we have about 150 hybrids on the research station at Walkerman that we've generated over the last several years and that we're assessing. So our assessments include looking at many of the tree traits. We look at things such as the tree size, obviously, and the tree vigor, but the openness of the canopy, the yield, whether they're bunch bearing or not. We take into account all these traits. The fruit is then harvested, taken into our laboratories, where we look at about 20 or 30 individual traits on the fruit that designate quality, things like the shelf life of them or the flesh recovery, the colours, the flavours, the skin thickness, how much fibre they have. So we take all this into account when we're evaluating our hybrids and trying to make selections for the next generation of hybrids which we hope to release to industry. Another area of the breeding program where we've been working quite hard in recent years is to try and bring some anthracnose tolerance. We don't have full resistance, but we have some tolerance with anthracnose that we found in some quite wild species, and we have to bring that into a commercially developed new variety, probably some years in the future. So we've identified the tolerance, we've made some crosses to it, and a couple of those crosses are also showing great tolerance. Unfortunately, they're also showing a lot of very wild characteristics. So we're probably going to need 1 or 2 more generations before we can get that tolerance into a commercially acceptable variety. But slowly, slowly, we're moving that in. And once we have that tolerance, it should enable us to use less chemicals and be able to control anthracnose in the field and in wet years a lot better. So where are we going next with the mango breeding project? Well, we're continuing to cross every year. Currently, we've identified a few of the hybrids which we've generated over the last several years in a short list that we would like to test on growers' properties. This year, we will have that list completed and be starting to propagate up and get some of the better hybrids, which we hope to release in the following years, onto growers' properties, a few growers' properties, just to make sure that these things perform well in other environments other than just our research station. We'll continue the anthracnose breeding, and we will continue to try and breed dwarf scions. So we're not only reliant on rootstocks for dwarfing, but we also have small varieties that will fit in with our other programs and the whole push towards high density intensive orchard systems. So I'll move on to the orchard intensification program side of things. This is our small tree program. And in here we have...
Sorry, Ian, if we've just got a question in the chat box.
Yep.
Marcello's asking about sunburn issues.
Sunburn issues.
There's some of your photos of anthracnose was, yeah, if there was any sunburn problem there.
Yes, well, there's certainly sunburn issues we have throughout the industry. We haven't actually got breeding lines that are specifically sunburn tolerant. Sunburn varies a lot with year to year and also with the colour of the fruit and the stage of development. But certainly sunburn is something that we're looking, and I will mention a little bit about it when I talk about the small tree project in a couple of slides' time, that we're fully aware of, and we need to start managing around, or if we can breed around it, we certainly take it into account. So,
answer your question, Marcello? No. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Great.
Perfect.
Thanks, Ian.
No problem. So the Mango Orchard Intensification Program, otherwise known as the Small Tree High Productivity Initiative, has been running for some time now. There's been 3 main projects in the program to date. We have the Transforming Subtropical and Tropical Tree Crop Productivity, which started in 2014 and just finished this year. So that has been the main project that we've been running for 7 years now. It was originally a 5-year project, and we've extended it a couple of years. That has been replaced by a new project which we've just got up and got funding for. The funding has come from the Queensland Government and the Hort Innovation Frontiers Fund. So that's the National Tree Crop Intensification Program. Now, this project is wider than just mangoes. In Queensland, we're also looking at macadamias and avocados, and the new project will be also looking at citrus in New South Wales and almonds in the southern states. But today I'll just talk about what we intend to do in that project in mangoes. And then the third project, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Jeff and Dale after I finish speaking, is the Transforming Mango Futures project, which started in 2018 and goes through to 2021. Okay, so the project that has been running and is just finished is the Transforming Subtropical and Tropical Tree Crop Productivity. The aim of this was to transform the productivity of subtropical and tropical tree crops through orchard intensification or higher density plantings, and see if it was possible in mangoes, and work out how it was going to be done and any issues that were specific to our biology of mangoes. Similar intensification programs have been done in temperate crops for many years, and it's the tropicals that are following on with this whole intensification push at the moment. So there's a whole range of areas that we've worked on over the last 5 years, and I won't be reporting on all of those, but I'll give you a synopsis of some of the major ones. So we've been looking at the light relationships, how the mango canopy interacts with light, what's the most efficient way to get light into our canopy and improve the photosynthetic capture of light and turning that into crop or vegetation. We spent a fair bit of effort on vigor control. We have rootstocks and planting system experiments looking at managing the vigor of mango trees. So in any intensive system where we have smaller trees, managing vigor is always a major component. So part of that involves looking at how the trees grow and the tree architecture. We've had a group in the University of Queensland looking at molecular physiology, so looking at the DNA of genes and how they affect things like flowering and branching and what we can learn from that. We had another group looking at modelling, trying to model the growth of the mango tree so we could then run small experiments where we could test scenarios out before we had to try them out in the field. And also the other major area of work is crop load. How do we manage crop load in mango? We have a tree that has irregular bearing. Is the ways that we can maximize the crop load in any one year or even it out over the years to give an overall better cumulative yield rather than the sawtooth pattern that we're all used to. Okay, rootstocks. This is part of the genetic improvement program, but has been funded through the Small Tree Project, and is a great example of how the two projects come together. To have longevity in any high density system, you look at all the temperate trees, they all require some way of managing vigor, and they all seem to have developed rootstock systems. So, you know, good rootstocks will extend the life of your orchard, they'll reduce the vigor of your trees, and they also change the balance of energy that's going towards leaf and branches and push that towards fruit. So they often have a big effect on improving yields as well. In mangoes, as you know, we generally use Kensington Pride in the industry, or common, as the rootstock, and they're used for their convenience and their polyembryonic nature, so they're nice and uniform, but they don't necessarily contribute to reducing the vigor of the scion varieties planted on top. So what we did back in 2014 is we went through our gene pool and the breeding program and looked for candidate varieties that we thought might be useful rootstocks. We weren't sure what we needed, so we went fairly wide and chose 97 rootstocks and evaluated them under 2 of the new varieties from the NMBP program, the National Mango Breeding Project, 1243 and 4069. So those trees are now about 6 or 7 years old. And at the end of this project, we've got to the point where we've managed to shortlist 24 rootstocks for each scion. So, and 7 of those rootstocks are common between both scions. So the implications of this is that we may need different rootstocks for different varieties. The likelihood of getting a universal rootstock that we can use for all varieties is fairly low, less than 50-50 at this stage. But we're always hopeful. So we've got another year or so on that project, trying to reduce those shortlists down to fewer varieties that we can then take to our next trial, which will be a trial in a high density system with several other sign varieties on top, some of the more commercial varieties. So that'll probably be planted in 2 years' time. The other way that we've been able to manage tree vigor, and that's come out of the Transforming Tropical Tree Crop programs, is with tree training or branch management. So currently growers have 2 ways of managing their tree vigor. We have pruning that we do every year, and we use the growth regulator paclitaxel, which has some effect on slowing growth down as well. What we've found is that in the high density orchards where we've been training trees to different systems, and mainly by pulling branches down to the horizontal or below, we're also getting some reduction in vigor. So that's a third tool that we will have to manage vigor in mango. And if the rootstock works come through with a good vigor controlling rootstocks, that will give us a 4th tool. So I'm hoping that by the end of this next project, we would have doubled the numbers of tools that we have for managing vigor in mango. One of the main findings of the work we've done so far is the ability for us to increase productivity in high density orchard systems. Generally, our productivity on a per tree basis has gone down in the high density orchards because we have smaller trees. But because they're packed in at high densities, the overall production or yield per hectare has increased. And if you look at the figures here, I'll see if I get my mouse up there for you, you can see as we go from low, medium to high in all 3 varieties, generally our yields have increased. So our highest density, where we have trees planted at rows 4 meters apart and 2 meters within the row, last year we were able to get almost 70 tonnes out of heat. I'd just like to have a little bit of caution on that figure. That was on conventionally trained trees at the high vigor. Those trees were larger than the allocated space, and we're now forced to actually change the conventional training to more of a hedgerow spacing. So we may actually see some reductions in yields in that category, but we don't know and we have to wait and see. But generally, yes, we've got a reasonably good increases in yields, up to 5 times in some cases from the intensification process. That's up to 7 years old. The next stage of the project will follow these trees in this trial through to about 12 years old, and we'll see how the whole vigor high density thing impacts on yields as trees reach their allocated space and we have to struggle against mango's natural vigor. Remember that these are just on Kensington rootstocks, they're not on any particular dwarfing rootstock. So here's a couple of photos of Calypso at high density conventional. On the right here we have Keat single leader. These are planted at the medium density 6 meter rows and 4 meters between the rows. They have a central leader up the middle and light slots that allow light into the canopy. Bottom left, that's Calypso on a trellis, trained as an espalier, and bottom right is the Keat on the trellis. I'll keep moving because we're a bit limited for time. Just wanted to mention light quickly. We've looked at how light interacts, and what we find that amount of light captured by a hectare of land is certainly increased substantially when you have high density. And the graph on the right shows that the pink and the blue lines are the high density treatments, and they're capturing a lot more light per hectare in the 3, 4 and 5 years of age. earlier in the life of the crop. So we're able to capture more light and put it to use, which is one of the secrets of the increase in yield. The other thing we've been looking at is the way the light interacts within the canopy. And we can see on this bar graph on the right, the group here on the left and on the right are conventionally trained trees that have a lot of light on the outside of the tree. On the inside of the tree, it's quite dark. In our improved training system, Central Eden and Espalier, that light is increased inside the canopy and more even. There's a whole range of other results which I'm not presenting today, but I'm happy to take questions on, or if you want to contact us later. So in the new project, we will continue to investigate the performance of high density trials in that 8 to 12 years of age. We're going to continue the selection work for dwarfing rootstocks and take them on to the next trial. And that'll happen, as I mentioned earlier on, in a couple of years' time, where we put them into a rootstock by high density by new sign variety trial. We also continue to communicate with growers through seminars like this and articles, and through some of our field days and demonstration plots to try and keep growers and the industry informed of how we're moving along this investigation of intensification in mangoes. And are willing to help anyone who wishes to adopt any of these technologies and give them advice or whatever as they plant new orchards. So I'll pull it all up there, but I would just like to acknowledge that the DAF research team, as you can see them all there, they've all been working very high level the last 5 years to bring these results to you. And I'd also like to acknowledge the two major funders of the work, which is the Australian Government and Hort Innovation through their Advanced Production Systems Fund. I'll now hand over to Jeff to talk about his Mango Futures project.
Well, thanks for that, Ian. Does anyone have any questions for Ian just quickly before Jeff gets going? No? Looks like we're all good. Over to you, Jeff. Thanks.
Thanks, Casey. Okay, we'll be talking about the Transforming Mango Futures project. This is funded through the CRC for Developing Northern Australia. And what we're looking at is taking some of the very exciting work coming out of Ian's projects, combining that with some of the innovations that are already happening out there in the in industry with growers across Northern Australia, and rolling it out so that we can have some practical applications for this new technologies. I'll be talking a bit about some of the demonstration areas that the sites we're setting up, and then Dale will go into a bit more detail on the economic component of what we're looking at. I just mentioned that the other partners in the project are Meanbaloo, Mardo's Mangoes, and Australian Mangoes. So this project work really fits in well with the Mango Strategic Investment Plan, which is coming up for renewal shortly. But the first outcome from that plan was to increase industry productivity through increased yields and reduce costs per kilogram. And this is where we're finding that by gradually moving from wide-space trees to more high-intensity mango orchard systems, we can achieve both those goals. With the work that Ian has done over the last 6 years, we've identified a few best bet practices, and talking to our industry partners, we're going to test those over a longer period and see how the commercial application of those technologies can be achieved in the real world. So with the 3 demonstration sites that we set up last year, we have one at Katherine with Meanbaloo, one up at Mareeba with Meanbaloo as well, and then down at Bowen with Mardo's Mangoes. So in each of these 3 demonstration areas, we're looking at a medium high density spacing of around 3 metres between trees and either 5 or 6 metre rows. This gives us a tree stocking of either 555 or 666 trees a hectare. And on each of those demonstration areas, we're looking at 4 different systems. 2 which are the high density with trellising, but also 2 high density without trellises, just looking at more traditional hedging methods to maintain the tree shape. The varieties we're involving commercial varieties KP, R2E2, as well as 2 of the new NMBP varieties, 1243 and 4069. So here's some pictures of the 3 demonstration sites that have been established. So this was the first one that went in up at Mariba with Mambaloo, and we're establishing putting the trellis poles in there. The Mambaloo team helped with the design and setup and planting, and that trial has had a couple of ups and downs. It's been very, very vigorous growth, but we were impacted by frost very badly last year. We've done some replanting, and then we just had another frost early in winter this year. But fortunately, thanks to the work of the on-site managers from Mambaloo, managed to save most of those trees, and they're already reshooting with some flush now as the spring temperatures come in. So hopefully that trial will get away very well over the next few months. The second trial that was established down at Mardo's Mangoes with Ben and Ashley Martin, planted in March. We used different technique to establish the trellis poles, where Ben used his post hole digger on the back of a tractor. Worked very well, and him and the kids and a few others helped plant all those trees, and they've got along pretty well as well. There was a few waterlogging issues last year with the heavy rains and flooding around with the Townsville events, but we're getting to a stage now where we're starting to train those trees on the trellis and also with the high density without trellis. The third site's at Katherine. That was planted in April last year. It was very dry. It's had a very dry 2 years now, but just add water and trees will grow in the Northern Territory, and within 12 months, those trees looking very good. There's some of the non-trellised high density trees, and then here we have the trellis trees. So we were there a month ago. It was one of our first trips out of the region over to Katherine, and started working with Mambaloo and their team to train those trees along the trellis wires, and also training the trees outside the trellis areas to get the shapes that we hope to achieve. So that's the 3 demo sites that we're dealing with. Of course, we're looking at the actual returns on these different systems working in a commercial environment. And that's where Dale's going to talk a little bit more now about the economics of the different management systems. So I'll pass over to you, Dale.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Okay, so the first graph we're looking at here is the capital outlay required to set up each of the 4 different treatments, and it's based on a per hectare basis. So the 4 treatments we've looked at for the analysis is low density, planted at 6 by 8 at 207 trees a hectare, medium density at 6 by 4 metres at 408 trees per hectare, conventional high density at 4 by 2, and that's at 1,242 trees per hectare. And finally, the trellis high density system, also at 4 by 2, but that works out to 1,188 trees per hectare. So just starting with land preparation, so not much different in costs here for each of the 4 treatments. These include costs like spraying, slashing and ripping in preparation for putting the trees in. Your irrigation costs includes things like sprinklers, lines and labour to install it. The irrigation costs for the high density treatments were roughly double the cost for the low density treatments, but that is mainly due to labour and because you need more sprinklers per hectare for the higher density treatments. For planting costs, this includes things like the actual cost of the trees, pre-plant liming and labour to plant them. The cost for the higher densities were roughly 6 times the cost of the very low density, but again, this is purely a factor of the higher number of trees required for the high density plantings. So for the trellis system, we've based the design on recommendations that came out of the cyclone resilience work that was done a few years ago. The system's designed to withstand a high intensity cyclone, so we use really thick posts, sturdy wires, etc. So on a per hectare basis, the trellis system worked out to a bit over $30,000, which would be a significant investment, but as it would provide some resilience against cyclones, in addition to other benefits, this may make the investment more worthwhile. So for the totals we're looking at for the initial setup, low density, roughly $10,000 a hectare, medium density about 15, the high density conventional, roughly 35,000, and for the trellis, roughly 65,000 per hectare. So the final graph that I have is the gross margin per hectare, and this is for the first 10 years of the orchard. It's the cumulative gross margin, which helps us identify where the break-even point is, showing when the initial investment starts making a gross profit. So we're using gross margin, which is based on the costs associated with growing the crop versus the revenue received from the sale of the crop. So it doesn't take into account things like depreciation of assets, buying land or equipment, etc. The profit or loss from the year before is added to the following year to give you a cumulative total. So the data that we've used are from the Walkerman Small Trees trial. So with solid lines being representative of actual data and the dashed lines are predicted or estimated. So, and we've also focused this on the Calypso variety, as that's the main commercial variety being used in that trial, and all the costs are on a per hectare basis. So there's a lot to take in, so I just want to run through all of those parts to it. So beginning with the low density conventional, it breaks even at year 5, and by the final year is predicted to be grossing roughly $67,000 per hectare. For the medium conventional, it also breaks even at year 5, and by the final year is grossing about $130,000 per hectare. The high density conventional, due to its higher productivity per hectare, and despite the initial extra costs associated with establishing it, breaks even a year earlier than the low and medium densities, and by the final year is grossing close to $350,000 per hectare. And last of all, the trellis system, it breaks even at year 6. So as you can see, it dips down in the by year 3, we're at roughly minus 100,000 there. So that's due to the higher upfront costs of establishing the trellis infrastructure, as well as the additional labour costs needed for pruning and training on the trees on the trellis. But with that said, the initial investment is recouped only a year later than the lower density plantings. And from that point on, with the high productivity predicted from the trellis system, it's likely to exceed the revenue of the lower density plantings. So a full economic report will be completed by the end of this year, and we're going to be using the learnings from that to improve orchard management systems and increase industry productivity through increased yields and reduce costs per kilogram. So that's it from us, if there's any questions.
Thanks for that, Dale. So we've just had a question come through before. Looks like it's for Ian. So what sort of time frame is involved until these sorts of results can actually be implemented on farms?
There'll be a range of time frames. Which particular results was the question referring to?
Doesn't say. Charlie, could you give us some clarification on which ones you were asking about?
Sorry, yeah, just generally, I know some of your results are more applicable, but some of these genetic things where you're talking about 12 years to get to somewhere would suggest that it's a long way away before implementation.
Yes, well, generally as a rule of thumb, from crossing to release of a variety is about 20 years. We have a pipeline of varieties now that are in place, and as I say, we're going to move some of those out under growers' properties to test them. So I would imagine we're not going to see those released to industry for another 5 years or so. I would like to try and fast track a rootstock once we identify one, but I can't really see us being able to identify one, ramp up the production of seed in time in less than 5 years. If we're looking at getting disease resistance into a variety, we can double that to 10 years. It's not a fast process. So the genetic improvement is a slow, steady game where we have to be in there every year, improving. And we're always looking at ways to improve the efficiency and speed that up. And that's why we're also working with the geneticists and genomics people, trying to understand the genetics better to move all that stuff forward quicker so we can speed the whole process up. But yeah, currently it's a slow process. We could, and we have varieties in the breeding program now that are very similar to the ones that are being commercialized through NMBP now, but I don't think there's a lot of point in flooding the market with more and more of the same. We're really looking for the next release of varieties to have something that's going to make a major improvement either to productivity or to the consumer quality of mango.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Just another question has come through in the chat box. Dale, in your calculations, did you include any ongoing costs, including wages, pruning of the trees, etc.?
Excellent question. So the gross margin. For the report that we have coming out towards the end of the year, we're hoping to have a bit more of an in-depth analysis. So gross margin doesn't take into account things like wages. It's purely just the inputs that are required, so fertilizer, chemicals, labour, etc. Grow the crop, and then whatever revenue you get from selling it. Yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Dale. Any further questions from anyone for the DAF team?
If there's no more questions, I might just quickly go back to the first question about sunburn that I didn't really have time to comment on. When I showed the slides where we're looking at the light distribution in the tree, part of the analysis of how light gets into the tree and the benefits is what is its effect on blush colour, but also what is its effect on sunburn. We have noticed there's been a small increase in sunburn in some of the trellis trees, but seeing we're getting 4 or 5 times yield increases, that sort of compensates for that a bit. We're also doing a lot of work looking at fruit quality in the high density systems and the effect of these systems on pack out. I didn't present any of that today, but that work is continuing. And so we're really trying to understand if there is a downside from sunburn, what its incidence is, what its severity is, how does it affect pack out in the different varieties. So that's the sort of information that we will be continuing to look at in the new project.
Can I just throw in there, just with Dale's analysis, it does include wages of actually doing the operation.
Yes.
It was just the grower management cost, and a lot of analysis have a statutory figure of what a grower manager would be paid on top of all those other costs. So.
All right. Thanks, guys. Any further questions? No. All right. Thanks, guys. We will move on to some fruit fly stuff. So now I'd like to introduce Christina Cook. She's the manager of the National Fruit Fly Council, and she'll be giving us an overview of the council and what they've been doing with their high research projects. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks for that. Can you see my screen yet? Is that sharing?
Yeah, looks good, thanks.
Great. Hi, so thanks for having me today. I'm just going to give you an overview of the National Fruit Fly Council and also some government-funded research that the council has advised governments on and which has already been commissioned. Now I've got to try and... There we go. Okay, so The National Fruit Fly Council was formalised in 2015, and the purpose really of this council is to bring national cohesion to the system, and that's really to underpin our trade, our export trade, and have a cohesive system for promoting the way that we manage fruit fly in Australia. So the role of the council is really providing advice to decision makers on the national fruit fly system. And as you can see in this slide, there's lots of stakeholders that are involved in making decisions across Australia, from growers and grower groups and peak industry bodies, the research providers, Hort Innovation, the various government agencies, and also then their negotiations with international governments. So it's a group that tries to bring some, an opportunity to have discussion on those issues of national importance. So who's on the council? We have a range of industry grower representatives, and in that picture you might be able to see Dale Williams, who's a mango grower in Bowen. He's a very active member of our council. And those grower representatives are people from across Australia, from the different commodity groups, bringing a different perspective from on the ground. We also have state government chief plant health managers and the Commonwealth government representatives, as well as Hort Innovation on that group. So it's around about 18 people sit on that council. So one of the recent things that we've been working on is a new national fruit fly strategy. The last national fruit fly strategy was developed in 2008 and was very comprehensive. This new strategy has been pared back a bit and focuses on 4 strategic objectives. So maintaining freedom from exotic fruit flies, minimising the occurrence of fruit fly in Australia and trying to prevent its spread, ensuring that the national system actually supports trade, and that's both domestic and internationally, as well as building a cooperative approach to minimise any overlap that there is in research and other areas. It works on 7 different priority areas. We actually have 8, one's dropped off, I'm sorry there. But this is a bit of a demonstration of the complexity that we're working with fruit fly and for any pest really. So market access is our #1 concern, managing established fruit fly, working to prevent and prepare for any exotics, coordinating research as well as surveillance to underpin area freedom and also monitor in field, being able to diagnose the types of fruit fly we might be dealing with, and communication and engagement of fruit fly issues. And the 8th one that dropped off there was cooperation. So in terms of current issues that the council have been looking at, I've been with the council for a year now, and the most important issue that's been discussed over this time has been the east-west fruit fly distribution profile. So the east-west distribution profile actually refers to the occurrence of medfly in the west and Q-fly in the east, and it underpins a lot of our trade negotiations, both with trading partners overseas as well as the domestic ICA system. And one of the reasons that this is important is Q-fly really only exists in Australia, and so it's really of high importance for our trading partners to keep it out of their country so they can continue to trade more freely. While medfly is more widely spread, you can see in the map on the bottom of the screen, but it's still of concern because a lot of the East Asian countries don't have medfly, so it's still of a concern to them. And of course, we have the Torres Strait Exotic Fruit Fly Response Plan, which is a really important aspect of maintaining freedom from oriental fruit fly and other other pests that might also block us out of countries. Now, some of the other issues we've been discussing include the sterile insect technique, and that's both for medfly and qfly, and particularly the infrastructure and being able to continue to fund this infrastructure, the factories that produce the sterile insects. There's also been work on new national fruit fly codes of practice. So these are agreements with governments as to how we will manage outbreaks and manage our fruit fly status. We've been hearing more and more reports about chemical limitations and other in-field issues, and that's an area we'd like to explore more. There's a call for looking at a sustainable funding model for fruit fly. And this goes back to the infrastructure issues, the issues that we have with research capacity and diagnostics, and making sure that we've got that underpinned properly. We also speak about the interstate fruit fly detections in commercial fruit and the concerns that raises with trading partners as well, and the government research program. And I'll just quickly touch on those last two issues in these next slides. So in terms of the interstate fruit fly larvae detections, Robert Gray, as you all know, who you all know, came along to council in March and actually raised this as a concern that growers were not being notified in a timely way about infested produce, their own infested produce that was found interstate. So the council has referred this matter to Plant Health Committee, who are the chief plant health managers and can make decisions about what process they adopt. And we have an article coming up in the Mango Matters newsletter. And I'll just run through very quickly what we've been told is that the government process is that they will first confirm that the larvae is fruit fly, and they need to have appropriate staff that will be able to do that. And and then they report the detection to the state that the produce came from. And that state then initiates an investigation into the consigner, who was actually sending the produce across. That consigning business is then notified of the issue with the consignment and suspended under that particular pathway. So what we've discovered is that there's a concern in terms of the that's a reasonably slow process because government's ensuring that they're confirming that they actually have a fruit fly, and they're also having to go through a jurisdictional process of who actually has the accreditation and where did all this go wrong. And that tends to all occur before the consigning business is notified. So the added complication to that we've learned is the consigning business often is not the grower, and sometimes the grower isn't even aware that the produce has actually been sent to a particular market. To cut a long story short, I know that Plant Health Committee and Mango Australia are actually in discussions about how that can be improved. So I guess that one's a watch this space and speak to, happy to talk more about that, or Robert can comment. In terms of the government research program, in 2019 there was a national intergovernmental agreement signed by all state governments in the Commonwealth, and they agreed to put in $13 million for co-funded research. And that's in recognition that there's of the need for coordination and the need to strengthen our fruit fly system. They agreed that the projects that would be funded were ones that typically wouldn't be funded through industry organisations. So far there's 3 projects that have been commissioned under this program, so I'll briefly touch on each of those. The first major one is phenology, demography and distribution. And this project is looking to collect information on established species. fruit fly species. So they've got a range of species they're looking at, including some of the minor species, which aren't yet economically important, but there is acknowledgement that these may become important in trade as well. So the project is looking at distribution mainly. Where are the pests now and where are they likely to be in the future? And this is using information on seasons as well as on reproductive capacity. The reason that this project was chosen is because it enables an opportunity to update our host lists on each of these species so that we're prepared for markets, being able to explain and you know, which species might be impacted, also to improve any in-field pest control that needs to occur, as well as looking at some of the diagnostic tools for quick analysis to minimise any spread if that's a necessary element. So that's the first project. The second project is methyl bromide efficacy. So while methyl bromide is internationally being phased out, it's still a very important treatment here in Australia. And this project is about, they're going to be grouping commodities based on their absorption rates and then collecting information after repeat trials on the efficacy of those dosage rates so that they can optimise the treatments and ensure that each stage of Q-fly is addressed in that process. It provides an opportunity to update the Interstate certification assurance requirements so that we're not, you know, we're using an appropriate rate and that there's confidence in that system. The third project that's been commissioned is on biological controls. So this will be done doing research into the biology of particularly Q-fly and looking at things, at tools such as parasitoid wasps, nematodes and fungi to see, you know, the impact that they might have on controlling Q-fly populations. And again, part of the reason this was chosen is because there's been a lack of investment into alternative options to chemicals, and there's but it's understood that this is another tool that can be used and it's going to be complementary to IPM. The other research ideas that are being looked at the moment for the final portion of funding is looking at biological controls for medfly, packaging impacts on methyl bromide fumigation and risk pathways into pest-free areas. So that whole set of projects will be completed by the end of 2022. In terms of the council, the things that we're doing next, we're also running webinars. So we're running one on sterile insect technique in September. And then we'll also be looking at the Interstate Certification Assurance Scheme. There's a national review occurring at the moment, so it's an opportunity to have a look at that. Irradiation, just learning a bit more about its application. We're running a series of workshops with grower groups to understand what the regional priorities and issues are. This is trying to build a ground up understanding of some of the particularly in-field issues with fruit fly that are occurring. And that information will feed into a national symposium in 2021 and help inform, you know, where to next, where's the investment next in fruit fly. Finally, if people would like any more information about the National Fruit Fly Council, or you know, would like to connect with us, find out more about the webinars or workshops, or just provide some suggestions to us, we have a website, the Prevent Fruit Fly website, as well as e-newsletter, Twitter account, and of course there's an email address that you can contact us with. So you'll get all that, I'm sure, when Maureen and Casey send that around. So I've dashed through that as quickly as I can, and hopefully we're almost on time, but yeah, hand back to you, Maureen and Casey.
Thanks very much, Christina. Does anyone have any questions for Christina? No, nothing coming through. All right. We'll just share our screen again. There we go. Oops. Oops. Oh, I've lost it. Sorry, everyone. Here we go again. All right, well, if there's no more questions, we'll just let you know what we've got coming up in terms of our weekly pre-season webinar series. So next week, same time, Wednesday, 16th of September, we will be hearing from CQU and UNE about what they're doing in remote sensing. And then the following week, we will be doing a marketing webinar. And then the week after that, an update on chemicals and what's happening in that area. So hopefully we'll get to see you all next week and in the following weeks. Is there anything, Maureen or Robert, you would like to add before we wrap it up?
That's all good from me. Thanks very much, Casey, and all the presenters today. I think that was a great webinar, and looking forward to next week's.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining us today. All of the slides will be sent to you today alongside a small feedback survey.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Hope you have a great week, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.